Hello and welcome to episode 140 of the Clean Energy Show. I'm Brian Stockton.
I'm James Whittingham. This week, with the World Cup underway in Qatar, we look at what might be the peak of petrol state decadence. I mean, what does $200 billion even get us? A soccer tournament without beer? Hell, even my kids' Pee-wee soccer tournaments had beer.
The governor of Tokyo has solved the energy crisis. The solution? Turtleneck sweaters. Speaking as a Canadian, wait until they hear about toques and woolly socks.
Well, the COP27 climate summit was a bit of a wash. You know, like standing in the middle of Miami.
Domino's Pizza is moving to Chevy Bolt electric delivery vehicles. They've ordered 800 Bolts from GM, and if they don't receive the cars in 30 minutes, they're free.
All that and more on this edition of The Clean Energy Show. Holy Nelly, Brian, we're back with another show, another week. We're nonstop robotic machines here.
Yeah, lots going on.
And also this week, will I fit into the surprisingly sexy new Prius? The answer will sadden you, I think. Biden gives billions to the U.S. power grid, and Canada follows the U.S. in installing heat pumps in regions where oil furnaces are popular. And I still can't figure out why oil furnaces are popular. They just didn't want to run they just became popular, I think, you know, when the coal.
rural areas where it's hard to get them on the grid, I guess.
And how are you this week? I'm going to tell you right now that I'm not well. I've been sick.
You sound terrible, James. You sound awful.
No, I'm not possessed. That is my lungs. I've had illness, a flu, since last we met, Brian, pretty much.
Okay, but it's not COVID.
Well, here's what I did. I tested my family because they're all sick. They gave it to me. My daughter brought it home from high school. And I knew I was going to get sick. So I just they tested, my wife and my daughter tested, and they're negative. So I thought, I'm not going to stick anything up my nose. It's not like I have something different. I don't go anywhere, as you know.
You don't go anywhere.
So, I mean, I've had a hellish number of days. So I am barely able to be here today. And by the end of the show, I will be soaked in sweat.
Oh, dear.
Because I'm still, doing anything is like a chore. I skipped lunch yesterday because I couldn't go downstairs.
Oh, no, that's terrible.
That's one of my favorite meals of the day.
That maybe answers my question, because the pet peeve of mine, people often say they have the flu when what they really mean is that they have a cold. So you said you have a flu. Do you really believe it's the flu, or is it a bad cold?
I was going to jokingly bring the CDC chart on this to the show, and I thought, no, I'm not going to. But now I wish I did.
Yeah. Well, it's a pet. People say that all the time. Oh, I had the flu. And no. You just had a bad cold. If you've got the flu, it typically means you cannot go to work or go downstairs for lunch.
Yeah. Well, there are there's overlaps. Okay. But, having fever and severe aches is very uncommon for colds. You can have a mild fever, you can have a brief fever, but to have a long fever and severe aches, which I did, even with pills, I've been throwing down pills left and right until yesterday when I decided I've had enough. But I took one for the show, so maybe it'll kick in halfway through. We'll see. Anyway, I had to do some harrowing things, like go drive my family home from the Grey Cup, the Super Bowl of Canada, because they were volunteering there because my daughter's going on a school trip, and that was one way to fundraise. Well, it killed my wife. She was a little bit sick still, and she had to work 10 hours one day serving rich people, which is always fun. Then my daughter asked, Dad, is it legal to quit high school and go get a job? And I said, look, young lady, you want to be the people getting served, not the servers, okay? You want to stay in school. You want to be those rich bastards getting hors d'oeuvres served to them by people like you, raising money for school trips. You don't want to be the person who's 30 years old and has 6 kids and is trying to serve. I mean, we need those people. Those people will exist, but
what if she quits school and becomes an entrepreneur and starts a $1 million web company?
Well, sure. I think she's more likely to start a bakery or some sort.
Yeah. Well, not a huge amount of money in that.
No, but people do that. There's a lot of people who do that. In fact, there's a number of successful local businesses which are at least popular with people who rave about their goods and
there's some great bakeries. Finally, there's great bakeries here. There never used to be.
Yeah.
It was always ironic because we're surrounded by fields of wheat. There's just nothing but wheat around here. Mm-hmm. But 20 years ago, you could not get a decent loaf of bread in the city. It was crazy. But now there's some really great places. Okay, so breaking news. I think we're probably the first podcast to deal with this important topic. There is an important website on the internet that has been down for 4 days now. And
it's not Twitter.
It's not Twitter. It's more important than Twitter. It's GoComics.com.
GoComics.com.
Yes. This is a website I go to every single day to get my daily comic strips. You know, I was always a newspaper guy, and one of the reasons I like newspapers was reading the daily comics. Now, many years ago, I switched to reading the comics online because you can get whatever comics you want. You don't have to just settle for the ones that are in your newspaper. So I go to this website every single day, GoComics.com, to read a handful of comic strips. And it's been down for 4 days. When was the last time you had a website you visited and it was down for 4 days?
People don't have patience for that anymore.
No.
4 hours would be pushing the limits for most people.
4 days, and you can get a lot of the comic strips in other places, but there's a handful that are only on GoComics.com. It's driving me crazy. I've been looking into it, and cybersecurity apparently is the issue.
Uh-oh.
And, there's not a huge amount of information on the web, which is why, we're an important news source now for this story. But
getting the word out there.
Yeah. Anyway, it's driving me crazy. GoComics.com.
Do you want to explain what a comic strip is to people under 45 briefly?
A few panels in a newspaper, usually with a punchline.
Okay.
The one I'm really missing is Nancy and Nancy Classics. And this was a comic strip I didn't know about really much in my youth, but Nancy by Ernie Bushmiller, which ran like in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and they do reprints of this on GoComics as well as the new strip, which is quite good. So I don't know. I'm having withdrawals.
Another problem I have is I don't have enough fluids to get through the show.
Okay.
I was about to start the show, and I have this giant water bottle from Costco that I've got an electric pump on the top with a lithium battery in. It chose now to quit.
What? It's got a pump on it?
No, I bought the pump on Amazon. You could basically use these things in water coolers, although they're not quite water cooler size bottles. They're a little below that, but they're still about as much as a human can carry.
Okay.
And maybe beyond. I had my son happen to be home for Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving, and so we decided we're only going to buy it when our kid is home from college to lift it upstairs because it's crazy heavy.
Like it's one of those giant water bottles with a pump on it.
Yeah. Well, I put the pump on it. You can buy these pumps on Amazon for like $18. And mine just went dead right when I needed it most before I was going to fill up a water bottle before the show. And now I'm like I'm going to have to be careful.
Wow.
Very careful.
Ration.
Any coughing fits and I'm done. I mean, the show's going to come to an abrupt end. So,
well, if you have to pause, let me know.
I certainly can't go downstairs for water. I'm not, that strong.
No, well, at least, I mean, it sounds like you're in better shape than you were yesterday.
What have you been watching on TV while I've been sick?
Yes. Well, it's time for Brian's Movie Corner.
Brian's Movie Corner.
You mentioned this last week. There's a documentary on Netflix called Fugitive, The Curious Case of Carlos Ghosn.
Mm-hmm.
And have you watched it yet?
No, I skimmed it a bit because I was trying to see if they talked about the Leaf in his history. No. Okay. So
sadly, there's no real information about electric cars, but it was a nice refresher in who Carlos Ghosn is. I'd kind of forgotten what a superstar he was in the automotive world. He was originally the CEO of Renault 20 years ago or something, 25 years ago. And he turned the company around. They were headed towards bankruptcy. He turned around Renault, and then he became the CEO of Nissan at the same time, turned around Nissan. They were heading into bankruptcy as well. That he made both companies very profitable. And then he got arrested for, allegedly embezzling funds from Nissan, and then very famously escaped the country in a giant case on a private jet. He literally snuck out of the country after he was released on bail And so, yeah, it's a pretty good doc. It was interesting. Yeah, unfortunately, there was really nothing about electric cars. He was one of the proponents of the original Nissan Leaf. So maybe they're lagging in electric cars because he's no longer there. I'm not sure.
You know, in the documentary, well, first of all, there was a documentary, Who Killed the Electric Car? This is about the EV1 program, the first attempt at a car company making EVs. That was
the General Motors EV1.
Like 99, 2000 in that area. Then they destroyed them all. Then they didn't let anyone buy them. Legendary. And that was a good documentary. And then there was the Revenge of the Electric Car, which came at the point where, you know, Tesla was getting launched and trying to get the S off the ground, their first mass-produced car, I believe. And, you know, there was Carlos talking to Elon at the auto show, and they were kind of, it was awkward. It was a very cool encounter because it was awkward to egomaniacs who didn't want to give anything away. Carlos had said at that time that we're doing this just to hedge our bets. You know, if electric vehicles take off, you know, we'll be prepared. But he didn't really get behind them. He didn't make them compelling enough. He basically looked at the car for the first time without approving it. You know, he just looked at it at the auto show. Oh, this is what it looks like. Okay. But, you know, it was not a great looking car. It was divisive. I don't hate it. There's a lot of, you know, it's iconic in a way because it's designed with big buggy headlights to deflect the wind so that you don't hear them on the mirrors because you would in an electric car because they're so quiet. And then who else was there? Was Chevrolet. There was, what's his name, with GM, the cigar smoking, what's his name? I can't remember. Bob Lutz, the legendary Bob Lutz, who always said that EVs would fail and a Tesla would fail. And but then he was the guy sort of behind the Volt, which was coming out. So there was three things. There was a trifecta. There was the Nissan. This is history now. This used to be just my daily life. But there was the Leaf, the Volt with a V, which was a plug-in hybrid, essentially. It was an EV with a backup engine. And then there was Tesla getting off the ground. This was all happening in 2010. And this is when this documentary was made. And the first model years were 11.
By the way, there is a Cadillac ELR, I think it's called, for sale in Regina, which was based on the Volt platform. They only made a couple thousand of these things. So they're kind of rare, but it's a really good kind of plug-in hybrid Cadillac with all the luxurious Cadillac.
What's it going for?
I'm not sure. It was still kind of incoming. I saw a little thing on the web, but yeah. But anyway, so Carlos Ghosn, a controversial figure, and there's no particular conclusion in the documentary because he managed to escape Japan and go to Lebanon, where he's originally from, and he is, I guess, not been extradited or anything. So he's never gone on trial, so no one really knows what the full story is. But there was another executive at Nissan that was sentenced to was for helping to cover up his salary. They were trying to keep his salary quiet because it was quite high. So somebody at Nissan did do time for that. And then the pilot, like the guy who was like a U.S. Special Forces guy who got him out of the country, he ended up doing a couple years of time in
I hope it was worth it, buddy.
Yeah, I hope it was worth it. I don't know. I mean, I assume he was well paid. Carlos has got a lot of money.
When you're that rich, you're going to, throw at the dollar to millions really quickly. Just take them. Just get into freedom.
Quite clear on why he ended up back in Japan and in jail when Carlos Ghosn has managed to not go back.
Well, I think the pilot, he probably had a business there. He probably had a relationship with Japan if he was able to fly
could be,
there.
but he was an American, so but they didn't really explain that. But yeah, so it's they made the point a couple of times that in Japan the conviction rate is 99%. So if you are arrested in Japan, there is a 99% chance that you will be convicted. So the documentary sort of implies that there's something kind of hinky with the Japanese justice system.
Well, that's why you flee. You don't wait for your trial.
And that's why you flee.
Basically, the charge is the
yeah, like as soon as you're arrested, it's game over. And Carlos Ghosn in an interview after he got out, he apparently did 150 days in solitary confinement when they first arrested him.
Right.
Under what he says were inhumane conditions. And I mean, just that alone.
If you don't have a butler, it's inhumane. I mean, come on.
Yeah, no butler. But like his hands were cuffed and solitary confinement for like 150 days.
Yeah, I probably would have done the same thing, guilty or not guilty.
Yeah. So, he felt like he wasn't going to get a fair trial. And, very luckily managed to escape. Like they had to, so he was in a case that they said was an instrument case. They pretended that they were musicians.
Right.
And it was a big square case, but they said it was some type of an instrument and it couldn't go through the scanner because it was sensitively tuned, like it had just been tuned or something, and you can't put it through the scanner.
I could just picture them putting it through the scanner and seeing Carlos going in there.
All curled up. So, I don't know. It's only about 90 minutes. It's an interesting little doc.
Well, he is guilty, Brian. I've looked at the evidence, and it seemed pretty compelling case that he, I don't know what the punishment would have been for him, but why was he in solitary confinement? I don't understand that if he was cooperative.
But also, why would he need to embezzle money when, like, his salary was he was making 9 million euros a year? Why would he need to embezzle money?
I don't know. Maybe he had gambling debts. Maybe he was paying for the Leaf program. I don't know.
Who knows?
I don't know. Well, let's get on with the show. COP27 wrapped up in Egypt, and it's been a mixed bag of stuff for them. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but what did you think about how that went? Well,
it's how these things usually go, is that there's lots of optimism and then it's ultimately a compromise. There's always a compromise at the end of it because, this is a UN climate summit with hundreds of countries and, getting everybody to agree. I don't know. Sounds like it was not the best, but also not the worst.
I see this as a very crucial time, because there's a lot of fossil fuel bad things going on. They're, trying to claw at what they can to make as much money as they can.
Yeah.
And they would be happy to throw the climate down and our targets with it. So Bloomberg had a story on it. They said the United Nations Climate Summit just barely avoided ending in a deadlock. They went into a day or so afterwards. And the final compromise left big doubts over the prospect for new efforts to curb emissions. I quote, despite attempts by big powers like the United States, India, and the European Union, the agreement failed to raise ambitions on reducing emissions. That could mean the world misses the 1.5 degree Celsius warming target that enshrined the 2015 Paris Agreement. Calls to phase out all fossil fuels, not just coal, which is all they could come up with. They couldn't touch fossil fuels. And to peak global emissions by 2025, which is likely to happen anyway, according to the IEA, were shot down by many nations who export oil. And I'm proud to say we have a bad record, Canada, on this, but we didn't oppose it, even though we are a big oil exporter. I'm sure had a different government been in power, that would have been the case probably. But so while the phase down of all fossil fuels didn't make it to the final text, momentum grew around the idea that wasn't even in the cards before the summit. As many as 80 countries now support it. So we're moving towards banning fossil fuels, basically. We're getting closer to that.
There was a damage fund as well. So
that was a big part of it.
Everyone agreed to put in money to a fund for the countries most affected by climate change.
Yeah, and that's all I'll talk about on that. But we'll update some more stories as we go here. What's happening with
heat pumps?
$250 million in Canada, right?
Yeah, so I think we'd mentioned this before. There's a few more details. So there is a Greener Homes grant here in Canada that I've applied for. And they have now expanded the program with another component to it, which is to switch people from heating oil to a heat pump. So there's an extra $250 million now in Canada. It's a separate stream in the Greener Homes grant, and it won't technically be available until early 2023, but this is mostly for people in Atlantic Canada, where heating oil is apparently a fairly common thing. Rural properties, and everybody gets heating oil delivered. It's not a thing around here at all. We don't have this here.
No.
Even though we have lots of rural properties.
We have natural gas. We have the government who did that, right? We had a government utility. That's kind of why we have government utilities here.
But if you're in a rural property, I think it's mostly propane here. You can get your propane tank filled up. But anyway, this is so up to $5,000. It's only for middle and lower income Canadians. And the twist on this too is you can get the money up front. Usually with this program.
Wow.
you apply and you spend all the money and then you get a reimbursement. But this, because it's meant for middle income and lower income Canadians, you can actually get the money up to $5,000 up front to switch you. And, the potential is to save, according to them, as much as $4,700 a year on your heating costs. So what would
a heat pump cost? Have you done any looking into it for your own house?
Yeah, I mean, as much as like 25 grand, but I think these
for a heat pump,
it depends. And we need, of course, these super frigid cold heat pumps. I think in Atlantic Canada, it's not as cold, and hopefully it wouldn't cost as much, maybe 10 or 15,000. But yeah, you get the money up front. And I checked in on this is sort of similar and in line with what's happening in America with the Biden, what's that called? The IRA, the
IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act.
Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
That starts on January 1st, 2023. If you want to get a rebate on your heat pump in the U.S., it's anything installed after January 1st, 2023.
So you can get a after the fact rebate for yourself, not going from an oil furnace, right?
Yeah. I'm going to go through the normal program, and I think I'll get up to $5,000 as well for my heat pump.
It's too bad, though, because that would be hard for somebody low, middle to finance 10 grand if it wasn't pressing.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's why this program is that way. I get like in Atlantic Canada that, like rural properties are probably fairly inexpensive. So you can have like lower income people that own houses and they're going to be in trouble. But yeah, you can get the money up front, which is very cool. And yeah, very much in line with what's happening in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act. So I encourage everybody to check your local jurisdiction, your local state, your local province to see what rebates are available, and things are really going to get rolling in 2023.
So basically they're starting where the biggest bang for the buck is. So the biggest savings would be for people with oil furnaces. So they would be most compelled to maybe make that switch, right?
And heating oil is one of the things that's really gone up in price with the recent inflation that we've been having.
I was doing some research on this morning, and it said that heating oil heats up twice as fast as you get more bang for your BTU, basically, that it really heats up fast.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
But probably causes more pollution than natural gas.
Yes. Natural gas is relatively clean as far as fossil fuels go, although there's a lot of methane in there. The new Prius finally was announced on Wednesday in Tokyo and in the LA Auto Show. And, there's been lots of speculation about it, so I've been kind of curious.
Yep.
Ultimately, though, the Prius, there are actually Prius fans out there who are saying, wow, it's great, look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think? I've got a picture of it up. Did you?
Well, I love the styling. Like the design road that Toyota's been going down the last few years, I just do not like. And they reached a kind of an apex with that excessively angular design of the Prius. So I think they had kind of no choice but to go in the opposite direction. But it almost looks to me like they had designed it to be an EV. Like EVs are often designed for aerodynamics.
That's right. Yeah, they did. So, they cut down the roof line for that very reason, because there was no other way to gain efficiency.
So it's just a huge shame it's not a full EV, because it looks like it could be. It looks a lot like the original Hyundai Ioniq, which was a very aerodynamic shape. So I love the direction they're going. Like, this is a huge improvement in terms of the style, I think, of the Prius. But just a shame it's not fully electric. It just feels like that would have been the correct move. The Prius has been around a long time.
There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, you just, you obviously you refresh the models every few years, and it's totally time for a full EV refresh. And that's not what this is.
Now, some people make the argument that at the moment in time that we're in right now, that a plug-in hybrid, which there's a version of that, right? There's a plug-in version of the Prius. Some people think they all plug in. They don't. No. They're basically just a hybrid powertrain which utilizes an electric motor to be more efficient, but it's all gas doing the energy. So the plug-in version has gone up in range from pretty significantly. Basically, the energy density of the batteries have gone up. It's taking up the same space to go from, I think it was 40 kilometers to now 60 kilometers or 40 miles now of EV range, which is a lot more usable.
Yeah.
Oh, and in Canada, we would get the full $5,000 off. So that means, you've heard it here first because no one else has said this, the plug-in Prius Prime PHEV will be cheaper than the normal Prius. So why would anyone buy a Prius in Canada?
The rebate.
This is the situation that was like that in California.
Yeah.
When the Prius Prime first, there was no point. I mean, even if you don't care about plugging it in, why would you buy it? Because you have to resell it. You have to have a residual value. You might as well have the one that costs more. So it makes no sense for them to sell anything but the Prius Prime in Canada.
And they also went with more horsepower, which I thought was a bit weird. Like they
really bumped up the horsepower finally.
Yeah.
After 20 years of being mocked by truckers, by bumper stickers on truckers.
Yeah. So it's quite a lot faster now. But of course, that cuts into the miles per gallon a little bit, but not too bad.
Yeah, overall, though, I think it's it could be more efficient than it is. But the 0 to 60 is a lot faster.
Way faster, yeah.
That's fun. But no, here's my big problem with it, and that is that it sits lower. And then my wife has a Prius, if you're new to the show, and that's her work car that she has to have, inspected constantly because it's used for work. She takes social work clients around in it. They're not going to even talk about pricing or announcing it until, sometime in the first half of next year, as far as the Prime is concerned. So that doesn't do me. I need a car now, Brian. Should go buy that caddy.
Yeah. You should actually look into it. It could be that could be fun.
Unilever may launch ice cream from cow-free dairy in a year. This is an update to a previous story because we've been talking about precision fermentation, and here it is, Brian. Here's the headline. You wait for things to happen, and then there it is in front of you. Yeah,
and the dairy industry likely to be the very first of the animal-based products to be severely disrupted.
Here's a clip from the robot who reads the Bloomberg stories.
The company is working on a process called precision fermentation that uses substances like yeast and fungi to produce milk proteins in a vat. A product could be available in about a year. If successful, Unilever could be the first major food company to create an ice cream made from cow-free dairy, dubbed lab-grown milk, in a burgeoning industry dominated by smaller startups. A consumer giant like Unilever developing a precision fermentation version of one of its major brands raises hopes that the technology can scale up and be cost-effective.
The idea is that it's going to be cheaper and then also cleaner, much cleaner.
Yeah, I think a version of this ice cream already exists because there was a picture of Tony Seba eating some of it in that last YouTube video that he put up. So I think this does exist, but it's probably kind of expensive and only in health food stores, whereas Unilever would make it a mass market product.
It would probably be quite expensive, yeah. So right now, the idea is, he says by 2030 that, the proteins in milk is going to be replaced by fake stuff. Precision fermentation, and it's going to be cheaper, and dairy is going to go bankrupt. And this is the first sign of that happening. They're doing it. Maybe they'll advertise it as an expensive but greener option, I'm guessing, at first.
Yeah, and more expensive at first, but I think eventually, ultimately, cheaper.
And unlike, Beyond Meat, there really will not be a difference. It'll be identical. Yeah. It'll be very identical.
Yeah, because you're mostly tasting the fat and the sugar. The milk protein is a minor part.
3% protein in milk, I think. And
most of it's water.
And it's 10% that's not water, 90% water, 3% is protein. That's the part you replace. The others are fats and sugars, which are easily replaced.
Yeah.
Obviously. So, yeah. Anyway, speaking of Japanese automakers, Mazda looks like it could be, and I'm not convinced of this, but it could be doing something significant. They could be the first of the Japanese automakers to actually set a target that is reasonable. Mazda is raising its EV sales target to 40% by 2030, and they're investing $11 billion to accelerate this transition. Sounds like they got the memo.
Yeah, well, we were making fun of them for their MX-30, which is a very low-range electric car. They down to selling like only a handful of them. So they've been a real laggard, and so this is their first step up to the plate, 40% by 2030.
I mean, it's not maybe what it should be, but it sounds like they're getting the idea, right? I mean, that's something.
I mean, it's probably too late. I mean, I don't want to be a naysayer, but at least they have a target. Hopefully they survive.
505 of these things they sold through August, Brian. 505. I've sold more brownies at bake sales than they have than these cars. It's really, it's 100 miles of range. 160 kilometers of range, which is in today's market no good. Unless it's a cheap car, but it's $33,000 US.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. You expect something for that. I mean, you can get a Leaf, you can get a Chevy Bolt that does way more mileage than that and probably is a more capable car. So
yeah, for maybe only slightly more money.
And they even said this EV has been sold out. So you can't buy one. So there was a demand there. There's going to be some Mazda fans who want to go EV, but anyway, this is a story about VW maybe delaying their EV plans. Like VW was maybe one of the great hopes of the EV transition, and now the CEO has been replaced, right?
Yeah, and as we reported, they're on track to deliver 500,000 EVs this year, which is a significant amount. That's way ahead of everybody else except for Tesla. Herbert Diess was their CEO that put all of this in motion. You know, he really had a radical vision for VW and really felt like it had to be a radical remaking of the company, or, you know, they were going to run into problems. And so he started a lot of ambitious programs that have gotten them to 500,000 EVs a year, which is significant. But he was sort of moved out recently as CEO, and the new CEO is definitely scaling back these plans to be much less ambitious.
Boo.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
I think Herbert Diess was on the right track. And
he was.
You know, it's just like with Mazda. So Mazda wants to sell 40% EVs by 2030, but that means, you know, there's going to be people to buy the 60% of EVs that are gas in 2030. Seems unlikely.
It doesn't work that way.
Doesn't work that way. When EVs are available, people are not going to want the gas cars. So I don't know. The new CEO of VW seems to be betting that such things are possible. And
every car commercial on television is electric. Can you buy the cars? Not so much.
Not so much.
But for some reason, we're in this weird time where, all the car companies are vying to look like they're, then there's Toyota, who says we're electrified. So that's enough, right? Electrified.
So VW, they've got the second generation platform that they were planning to come out in 2026. They call this their Trinity EV. And now it's going to be more like 2030 under the new CEO. And 2026 might have been difficult to actually achieve. But if you're moving the goalpost down to 2030, even 2030 may not, they should be moving it up to 2024. And hey, you may not make the deadline, but, your
ambition should be moving up anyway. So that's a 3-year delay, basically, or worse. Let's hope not. And that's no good. We can't deal with that.
And it was already a kind of a target that wasn't, even as ambitious as it should be. They've got a lot. It takes a lot to turn a giant ship like VW around. I don't know.
But they're the best at it. The biggest car company in the world. They're the best at it. They know manufacturing in and out. So what the hell?
They've done really well to get up to 500,000. That's impressive.
I think what they're not getting is what you said, that once the pendulum sort of swings towards EVs and that the weight starts to get on the teeter-totter on the EV side, look out. It's not going anywhere else. It's going to tip way over, and then you're going to be caught with your pants down. So who's going to be able to provide those cars? Hopefully, Tesla.
You and I are already at the point where we would never in a million years consider buying another gasoline car, but we're still kind of the outliers. But every year, the percentage of people who won't consider a gas car just goes up.
Yeah, and it is. Regular people are considering EVs, and there's people around here with pickup trucks. I'm reading about them all the time. Their neighbors are, their business associates are, their clients are. This becomes normalized very quickly now. It's really going to pick up.
Yeah, so moving on to Tokyo. The governor of Tokyo, this is Yuriko Koike, has suggested everybody wear turtlenecks to help reduce their energy bills.
Okay.
And it's sort of a funny thing and a fun thing to make a joke about off the top of the show, but I'm in favor of this. It's, there's an energy crisis going on. Everybody's going to be struggling to make enough power, make enough heat.
Can I make a Turtleneck work? I mean, not everybody can.
Yeah, I'm not really, I don't think I own any turtlenecks, but
everybody owns
the idea
one, Brian.
is that dress warm and you can save money on your electricity bills, which are going up in Tokyo, just like they're kind of tending to go up everywhere. So
is it my neck that's the coldest thing, though? I mean, really?
Well, the idea is here's the quote: warming the neck has a thermal effect. I'm wearing a turtleneck myself, and wearing a scarf also keeps you warm. This will save electricity. This is what the governor of Tokyo said.
Around the house.
That's all true.
He wants people around their tiny little Tokyo apartments to wear a scarf.
I mean, it sounds radical, but why not? We have the problem here. I don't know what it's like in other places, but we often have this problem in North America where, like, office buildings particularly often have very poor heating or cooling that can't be controlled very well. So, like, there's often a problem around here where people have to wear sweaters in the summer because the air conditioning is cranked too high and nobody can seem to turn it down. Or I've actually heard of people who have electric space heaters under their desks.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's really bad.
In the summer.
I've seen that.
It's too cold because the air conditioning is too high. So,
that's not good.
Yeah.
So you're overusing the air conditioning, and then some poor employee has to use a PTC heater to sort of gain back the energy.
So I think, like, this in many ways used to be like a common sense thing where people just dressed warmer in the winter because it was kind of common sense. But, then you go to work in an office building where the heat is all wonky. So maybe it's too hot in your office in the wintertime. And then you just end up wearing a t-shirt instead in the winter. It's all messed up.
I wear fleeces and sweaters inside the house now, but that's because I'm getting old.
Right, yeah.
I'm still turning up the temperature a tinge more than it should be, and then I'm also wearing those things. That's not good.
I do the same thing, yeah.
It is not good at all.
Yeah.
I can't laugh, by the way. Otherwise, I'll go into a coughing fit, so I don't say anything funny. Well, Brian, as you know, the World Cup has started, and I know you don't have World Cup fever, but I do.
Oh, is that what you're suffering from?
Sure, I took a Tylenol for my World Cup fever.
Yeah.
This morning, Argentina lost to Saudi Arabia, the biggest upset in World Cup history, some people say.
Wow. I'm
sorry, Argentina, if you're listening. In fact, this is probably way too soon for me to even bring it up, and I apologize. Anyway, I was kind of, there's, of course, all the coverage, it's been announced like 10 years ago that they were getting this. So Qatar, which is a small nation state with oil, was accused of using their oil money to spend on the World Cup and bribe. And there's been some people who've actually been, charges and so forth. There's a new Netflix documentary. I won't make you watch it, but it's there, okay, on FIFA. This is a tiny Middle Eastern autocracy with a population of barely 3 million people. It's how do they get the world's biggest sporting event? This is by far the world's biggest sporting event. It happens only every 4 years. But the temperatures there in the summer are 50 degrees Celsius or 122 Fahrenheit. And that's when the World Cup is normally played during that time. And I, as you know, was in Death Valley when it was that temperature. Yep. And I could only get out of I was a healthier man then, and I could only get out of my car for 10 minutes at a time. My kids could do 12, 13. But then you're like facing the Grim Reaper, he starts to encroach on your area, looking for you to kill you. Because it's just, you can't play soccer in that. So they built, I guess they spent $200 billion of their petrol money on this games. And they've built 8 stadiums. One of them, I'll talk about in a minute, that's a little bit different than the other ones. It's recyclable. We'll just put it that way. But yeah, they've got air conditioning. The temperature is only like 24 degrees with like 64% humidity. These games, I've been checking on them. So yeah, it's perfectly reasonable for soccer. But I'll read you a bit from the Atlantic here. It says, Qatar might now be home to about 3 million people, but the proportion of actual Qatari citizens who live there is a little more than 10%. So there's hardly any. The rest comprised some very rich expatriates of other nations and a huge army of poor migrants. Up to 6,000 and some may have died, by the way. This is a whole separate issue, which is not part of our show, but, you know, my God. Yeah, it's just, my point is that this is the pinnacle of oil decadence. And to think that, you know, thousands of lives were not cared about and lost from other countries to make this.
In the construction of everything.
And we'll never have this again. This is peak oil. This is, I don't think we'll see crap like this ever again. This is the moment in time where it's all going to fall apart. They did not have any infrastructure. They're not a sporting nation. They didn't have a fan base. They had nothing, but they were very rich with their oil money. But Brian, their new money, you know, they haven't had this money for very long at all. Qatar has had huge reserves of natural gas, which was discovered, I think, quite a while ago, maybe the 70s or 80s by Shell, but they just left it there because they couldn't do anything with it. They had all this natural gas and nowhere to get it anywhere. So in the 90s, there was this coup. I think, you know, the leader of the country, the king or whatever the term they use for it, left to go on vacation to England, and his son took over. Which is why if I'm ever in that situation, I'm never leaving. Because my son would take over in a second. He would just, sorry, Dad. So, but he did a good thing for the country in a way, because he invested in liquefied natural gas tech so that it could be transported on a ship. So when you cool it, natural gas, it's like transporting oil on a tanker. But it's ridiculous how much, you know, it's like minus 165 degrees Celsius or something like that. They are now the third richest country in the world, and they learned how to extract natural gas from the ground much more cheaply. So even after they cool it and put it on a ship, a tanker full of natural gas is 4 times cheaper from Qatar than if it originated in the United States through their normal channels. That's just that's why they are so rich, is because their gas is cheap, even though they have to do that. So they started a sovereign wealth fund, though. This is the shocking part that I didn't know about. Even though they blew $200 billion on these games to make them, you know, a respectable country, which is not working out, by the way, because all we're doing is talking about how crappy they are, the LGBTQ rights and everything like that, and the fact that they, you know, can't serve beer at the games, and they yanked that privilege 2 days before. So they started a sovereign wealth fund, though, like Norway did, and they have $300 billion in it because they saw the writing on the wall. They knew that our Canadian jurisdictions here who have oil in their provinces don't think that way at all. They think spend, oil forever. Yeah. But, you know, when you had something, they didn't always used to have this. So they've only had it since the 90s. So in that short time, they've got a $300 billion sovereign wealth fund, and they're building up infrastructure. Part of the game spending is that, you know, to make it foreign investment possible. And I don't know that that's going to work, especially with their human rights problems, that a whole lot of people are going to go there. But they are planning for the end of oil by diversifying their investments around the world. So yeah, that fund is going into all kinds of things around the world. So, you know, there's been, of course, it's supposed to be a carbon neutral World Cup, and it's a joke. It's a bloody joke. Here's a clip from Bloomberg.
Organizers estimate that the World Cup will emit 3.6 megatons of carbon dioxide. International flights in and out of Doha will account for the majority of emissions. However, organizers argue that this World Cup will be more energy efficient than others, since fans won't have to fly to different venues and can instead just take public transit.
The sticking point is always the flights. Most Olympics and World Cups, it accounts to more than 85% of total emissions.
So that surprised me. I guess it makes perfect sense when you hear it. But it's not the building of these 8 giant stadiums and, you know, all the infrastructure around it. It's the flights and during the actual games. And it's the same with the Olympics. It's a very carbon intense thing when all these people do that.
Yeah. When you got to travel so many people around the world, that's what you do. You fly. Now,
the game today was in Stadium 974, which is built with shipping containers. This 40, it's not entirely shipping containers. It's like almost, it's like steel girders and shipping containers. But the 40,000 seat stadium can be disassembled and rebuilt elsewhere. So this is the world's first tear it down, build it back stadium, supposedly. And apparently, if everything goes on shipping containers, it can be shipped anywhere.
Yeah, so this will be available from my IKEA soon, I guess.
Quite the price, but yes. It was designed by a French architectural firm. Other things they're trying to do is they have built solar farms to offset the emissions from the games. You know, they're using electric buses and electric mass transit, so that's good. They're not, burning their own product, and they are supposedly buying carbon offsets, but they're way behind on that, Brian.
Yeah, so Domino's Pizza has announced, and this sort of falls into that category of story that we're going to, have to stop reporting soon because this is just going to be business as usual very soon and maybe is already. But Domino's Pizza in the U.S. has ordered 800 Chevy Bolts, and they're kind of custom painted with the Domino's logo and everything. And they've got about 100 of them so far. And these are going out to Domino's Pizza locations in the U.S. So they will eventually have 800 fully electric delivery vehicles for the fleet of pizza delivery vehicles. And of course, they're doing this because it just makes sense. And the Bolt is not a particularly expensive car. So imagine all the money they'll save on gas. This is just, the EV calculation that every business in the world is going to be making when it comes to fleet vehicles.
I wish, on your Domino's app, if you could select an EV to have it delivered like you can on other apps, for ride sharing.
That'd be nice.
Do you ever eat Domino's?
Never.
I would think you would hate Domino's. That would be an anti-Brian pizza right there.
No, when we have excellent pizza to choose from in our city, I don't see a reason to use Domino's. Okay.
Well, I agree. It is the pizza shows up at events a lot of times where people will,
right.
And you'll have some there.
Okay, so Joe Biden has promised $13 billion for the U.S. power grid. So this is part of the green spending from the U.S. And as we talk about frequently on the show, the grid all over the world is going to need some upgrades. And so this is a decent amount of money, $13 billion to upgrade the grid. And as we go greener in the next couple of decades, it's important to get the foundation correct first before we do that. So this is a nice, really forward-looking thing I think that the U.S. government is doing. $13 billion available to do grid upgrades around the country. So I think that's great.
It is subsidizing, what they could probably do themselves, though. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a weird thing about all of this spending, right? Because, companies like Tesla don't even need subsidies, really. Their cars are profitable already, and yet they're going to benefit from these subsidies. So it's always a bit weird. And, taxing fossil fuels, a carbon tax would probably have been the better way to go with all of this. Yeah. But, however it gets done, there's certain things politically that are difficult to do. Like a carbon tax. So, it wouldn't necessarily be my first choice for how to deal with it, but at least they're dealing with it.
Let's dip into the mailbag, Brian. This is a message from Nick. Hello, Brian and James. I live in New England and recently got a 2022 Ford Mach-E. That is an electric vehicle, small crossover, right? My battery life, as he calls it, was originally at 230 miles. He means range. So a range of that car when he first got it was 230 miles or 370 kilometers. And now that it is colder out, it is 170 miles and 274. So he's lost about 100 kilometers or 50 miles roughly of range. So I know about range decreasing in colder weather. My question is, does the range come back when the weather gets warmer? With the cost of new EVs, a range of 170 miles is not acceptable. Fan of the show since day one. Thanks. Wow.
Yeah.
That's how many episodes? 140. Congratulations, Nick. Thank you for sticking with us.
So, I would be bold enough to say that I think, James, you and I are the two leading experts in the world on EVs and cold weather.
Yes, you've come to the right place, Nick. Because Alaska has nothing on us. We're in the southern Canadian prairies where it gets to minus 40, and it has recently. Not this year, but it has.
And minus 40 Celsius is the same as minus 40 Fahrenheit. That's where the two scales
crossover.
meet. And it does get that cold here. So I don't know everything about how the Mach-E, battery meter works, but yeah, usually the range on any car is calculated on your recent trips. So if your recent trips have been in the cold, then your car is going to be smart enough to figure, okay, well, the next trip is going to be. So I assume that range will come back in the summer.
Of course it will. But in a way, Brian, this is a stupid question for us, to people
Nick.
Like us. But that concerns me, that the people buying EVs really, that there are things that this would be scary to somebody. Nick's obviously an EV enthusiast, but a regular person who doesn't care, who just goes out and buys their next car, might be very concerned about this if they don't know about it.
That's right. You're going to look at the range thing. Now, the one thing I can recommend is, I don't know if you can do this in your car, but in a Tesla, you can change the battery to percentage rather than miles or kilometers. Yeah. So when I first bought my car, it would give me the range in kilometers and started around 400 kilometers. But then you tend to get obsessed about that range. And every time you plug it in, it's like, oh, it's 5 kilometers less than it was last time I charged it. So I just switched it to percentage. And so then you don't end up obsessing about that mileage. But then if you're going on a trip, you use the trip calculator, and the trip calculator will tell you in a Tesla, it gives you a graph that says, okay, you'll get at your destination and your battery will be 20%. And that's what you monitor. And, sometimes it's a little bit off. In a Tesla now, these days, about 5% error is
that's pretty good though, actually, for this, they are getting better.
It used to be about a 10% error, where it would tell you, oh, your battery will be 20% at your destination, and then you'd get there and it'd be more like 10%.
Yeah, the Leaf is way worse though. It's the worst of all of them. Yeah.
That's one tip. Yeah, switching it to percentage and not worrying about it. Now, when you get to the summer and it is not giving you the same range, it is always possible that your battery has cells that have deteriorated or something. So it is something you have to keep an eye on, but presumably that will come back.
Yeah, and the way we do it on the Leaf is you put in the little data reader you buy on Amazon. It's a Bluetooth device for $20. It hooks up to an app for your car that's made by a third party. Mine's called Leaf Spy. Tesla's a little different because they have a different connector. I don't know how you guys do it, or even if you need to. But there would be, if you got into this, you can see how your battery is doing and know the state of health of it. But this means nothing. Okay, so let's say you lived in Hawaii where it's the same temperature every day. If you drove like a mad person for a day or two, it would show that you have a lesser battery, right? Because you're driving with a heavy lead foot. But if you're driving like a nun, then you're going very slow and gentle, and that's going to show a higher range. So it's not really showing what your battery is capable of. It's just what it's capable of based on your recent driving. And that is a weird concept to get around to people.
And also I'll mention too, it is typical for batteries to lose range, like battery degradation. And the typical formula seems to be you are going to lose about 5% of your battery in the first couple of years. And then it kind of levels out. So I assume my battery has lost about 5% of its capacity, but I don't know exactly how I would confirm that.
Yeah, and it's not something you should obsess about. You should know that when you buy the EV, that's why I always say buy bigger than you think you need. And then you don't worry about that, right? And it's always a good thing. But there's lots we can talk about here very quickly, okay? Now, the first thing is that in winter, a gas car loses range. You just don't notice it. You're not thinking about that, right? There's many factors. There is the dense winter air, so your aerodynamics are off. This affects EVs a little bit more because they're more efficient, and they're also usually more dependent on the aerodynamics of the vehicle for efficiency. So, and then you have if you put winter tires on, that's going to be less efficient for sure. That could lose you 10%. It could lose you even more depending on your winter tires. There's the snow on the ground or ice on the ground, the fact that it's just not a smooth rolling surface. That's going to, it's like if you're pedaling a bike through snow, it's going to be harder to pedal that bike. So, right. There's different factors like that. The battery becomes less strong in cold weather. When the battery is cold, it's chemically not capable of holding as much of a charge. It can't hold as much of a charge, the battery, in colder weather. And don't forget that you're using your battery to heat your cabin. That is a lot of heat, even if it's a heat pump, even if it's just not that cold, but a little bit cold, you're still using a lot of energy. In fact, it's different in every car. Your car is a PTC heater. Mine is too. So it's just like a toaster. It's like red hot elements heating up. That's the least efficient. And then the heat pumps, sometimes there's both a heat pump and a PTC heater. Sometimes there's just a heat pump. That uses less energy, but it still uses energy, Brian.
Yeah. No, and I checked, and the Mustang Mach-E does not have a heat pump heater, so it has a normal heater, which is, not as energy efficient. So, definitely going to lose range with that. Yeah,
you're definitely going to use range. And unless you're using it to make these long trips on the highway, then that's when the only time you really need to concern yourself, unless you have a long commute. For the most part, if you can charge every night at home, you just don't think about it, Nick. Don't think about it. Enjoy your fast heating car and your efficiency and how wonderful it is. And, keep us up to date too, as you drive it through the winter, because we're not in the worst part of winter yet. Drop us a line again on how you like the car and how it made it through the winter. Yeah,
and it's really only on road trips that you ever need to think about it. Like if you're just driving around the city, like you said, you charge at home, you're always going to have enough. With Tesla, they spaced the superchargers about 150 kilometers apart, roughly. It varies a bit. So that's about 100 miles apart. If you're going to go, Nick, on a road trip, you want to make sure that there is a charging station roughly every 100 miles. And, you should be fine. Like around here, when it does get minus 40, I don't think it's going to get to minus 40 where Nick is. So he's probably not going to have to worry about it. But they spaced them about right. So mine, I've got the standard range Tesla Model 3, and it can just barely make it between chargers when it's minus 40. If it's only minus 20, minus 15 Celsius, not really
it's not constantly minus 40, but we call that the worst case scenario around here, okay? Yeah. EV drivers call that. You want to be prepared for the worst case scenario. We've gone years without it getting that cold.
Yeah.
And then the last couple of years, it's gotten a few days that cold. So you want to be prepared for those days.
And it's usually only that cold overnight.
Right.
But last winter, and this was covered on the podcast, I drove up to Saskatoon, and the daytime temperatures was minus 36 Celsius, which is about minus 32 Fahrenheit. Daytime temperatures. This was at noon. And that's what I had to drive through. And, just kind of barely made it in my standard range car.
Yeah, so that's an issue. And another thing to keep in mind is if you are doing highway trips, that in winter, it charges slower. The battery can't take the charge as fast because it's like regenerative braking too. You can't put your brakes back into the battery pack as well when it's cold.
Yeah. No, that's kind of the biggest thing for me, because summer road trips where I'm only spending about 20 minutes at the charger, but the winter road trips in these cold conditions, it's more like you're spending an hour at the charger. And at that point, it gets annoying. And I'm at the point now where if this winter I have to drive up to Saskatoon and it's minus 40, I'm going to take a gas car, because I just don't want that have to wait an hour at the charging station.
The worst case scenario in the worst place in the world is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And we tell people around here that you could lose up to 50%. It varies from car to car, okay? I've heard somebody talking about 17% in his Ioniq 5 when it wasn't too cold, okay? So, but that's like the worst case scenario. Now, if you're driving around the city and you do, 60 miles in a day at the very worst, and you have, 170 miles, who cares? You plug in at night, it's going to charge the same way as it always does. If you're on the highway and it takes you a half hour to charge, it might take you an hour to charge. And that's a major change too in habits to be aware of.
Yeah. And of course, electric cars, they're not as efficient on the highway as they are in the city. Higher speeds are tougher for electric cars. You drain the battery a lot faster. And I really wish that when they publicized the range for electric cars, that they did a highway figure and a city figure. I think that's the way it should be done, but they don't do that. They pick a number kind of somewhere in between the two.
Yeah. But, you'll get used to this, Nick. There's a lot of weird little things that people fret about when they try something new. I did it. Brian did it. It's normal. We EV owners tend to think too much, but just enjoy the car. You'll get used to it, and tell your friends about it. And it's time for the lightning round, a fast-paced look at the rest of the news. And Brian, we've overstayed our welcome, which is good because I don't have a lot of stories this week. Rivian starts international deliveries of the R1T and the R1S in Canada. So you've seen one here, right?
Yeah, it must have been an American one that drove up over the border because I saw one on the road. But yeah, officially, deliveries of the Rivian just started in Canada.
Now, post the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, NextEra expects wind with storage will cost $14 per megawatt hour in the United States later this decade. This is only because this act was passed. And solar with batteries, $17 per megawatt hour. This is down, because of this act, 35 to 44% from before the IRA was passed. This is how much the IRA is going to affect everything and speed things up, if I may say.
Yeah, for sure.
This is a Brian story. I can't believe you didn't see this one, Brian. There's a induction oven maker who has added a battery to their stoves. Lithium battery. This is because I guess some of these induction stoves use a lot of draw, right? And they need, and some places aren't wired for it, and you'd have to get an extra panel if your panel's full. So they've solved that problem, interestingly, with putting a battery in a stove.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So the big draw, when you need it, comes from the batteries.
Well, and we talked about this before in terms of heat pump water heaters, because that's a similar problem with those, because you tend to need, a few thousand watts to run those. I think up to 7,000 watts to run an induction cooktop. So that's a lot of juice. It's one of the reasons I did a panel upgrade on my house, but it cost a few $1,000s to go from 100 amp to 200 amp. So I guess the idea is you can charge up this battery, and so it can draw more power. You can sort of just plug it in a regular outlet, as it were, but with the battery have much bigger output.
Right. So that solves that problem. But it's just weird to have that sort of appliance with a battery in it. And I imagine it adds to the price, but it's cheaper than maybe rewiring your house if you want to do that. So I thought it was quite interesting. BYD, the Chinese mostly EV maker and bus maker, has sold its 3 millionth BEV or PHEV. I thought that was an interesting milestone, 3 millionth.
Yeah, some are plug-in hybrids, but that's still an impressive number.
Oh, it's time for a CS Fast Fact. 636 fossil fuel lobbyists were preying on government delegations at COP27. 636. Oily bastards.
That's a lot.
Scotland approves a 38 megawatt solar plant next door to a closed nuclear plant. And guess how much the objections were in the community? 0!
No objections.
Was there objections when they put up a nuclear plant? Probably some concern. Solar, not so harmful, not so scary. A village in the French Alps, this is from CNN, demolishes its ski lift because there's no snow left. It hasn't snowed in years.
Oh,
this is where's my... The lack of snow meant that the last time it ran was about 15 years ago, and just for one weekend, and since then it has not been. This is sad.
That's very sad.
This is why the Winter Olympics will now be held in Qatar with fake snow and perhaps potato flakes. Finally, this week, India is looking to produce its own solar modules to meet all of its demand and then some. That's right. India requires a lot of solar, and they want to make it themselves. It makes sense. Perfectly capable country of ramping up something like this. They're looking for takers for $2.4 billion in government aid to offer stimulation to domestic manufacturing of solar equipment. They want to do all of their solar and export a little as well.
That's great news.
That is our time for this week and a bunch more. I apologize to myself. More than anything, my body wasn't ready to to go long. It was ready to go short this week, and I went long. We'd like to hear from you. Contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. We're on social media as Clean Energy Pod, @CleanEnergyPod. Leave us a voicemail, speakpipe.com/cleanenergyshow. That's the best way we like to hear from you. And if you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your podcast app. Rate and review us because, well, why not? New episodes come every week if you subscribe. So see you next week.
See you next week.